Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for yet another Film Fanatic video odyssey into the world, a deep dive into the world of exploitation. So, yeah, lately I've been doing lots of shows on a lot of newer films. It's been cool. I have this funny thing where I feel like I play catch up on newer things. There's usually a long period of time before I end up seeing newer things. I used to stay up on it pretty regularly. It's kind of funny. Things have shifted for me as far as my habits to especially around the habits of how I watch film and what films I watch. It's typically I used to go to, which I still go, and I want to give a big shout out to Opera House Video. I love that place. I've been going there for years and years. I've been a huge fan of that place. I've been had a I've had a good tie-in with them. I About a year ago or so I was writing reviews for Opera House Video for like new releases, and I was doing these printed copies. They used to put out Opera House Video used to put out these booklets every, I think it was just about every month, or maybe a couple times a week, or a couple times a month. But they used to have someone write reviews, or they would give a general synopsis on newer films that were coming out. And sometimes they would do things, do little reviews or little write ups on older films, but primarily it was a little booklet that they would hand out that you could get for free for like new releases and upcoming releases. And the first page of it was usually these reviews, mostly centered on newer releases that were coming out that week. New releases always come out on Tuesdays. Typically, it's always that's the day when a lot of newer films, or at least more so in the past. It's very different now, but typically, a movie would come out, get a theatrical release, and it would run for like a month or 2 month, kind of a it would have roughly about a 2 month span of lifespan in the theater, and it would obviously depend on the budget of the film. Say if it was, well, for instance, like a Marvel movie, it would be in a theatrical run for a couple of months. And if you had a film that was, say, you know like a horror film, like case in point, Hereditary, for instance, Ari Aster's masterpiece, or a film like, say, The Lighthouse, Roger, just one of my Robert Eggers is one of my favorite directors. Those are horror films, and they have a kind of an independent flair to them, but they're also run by relatively big studios. But like films like that are a little bit outside of the commerciality, say, of an Avengers film, a movie like that would typically go out, hit theaters for maybe a little less than a few months, but it would have like an Avengers movie, like say Endgame from the Avengers movie, that ran in theaters for like 7 months or something. That was a massive, massive hit. Or like you take another example of, like, say, Avatar, The Way of Water, say the newest one. Those films like are typically in the theater for 6 months sometimes. But like then you have like films like Hereditary or Lighthouse. They're in the theaters for a long period of time, but definitely in comparison, a shorter amount of time. Maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe a little less. And then you have another kind of tier of films, like say foreign films or even documentaries that get a release. They will be in probably circulation, where you could go see it in the theater for maybe a month or so, or but they'll definitely get pretty high profile distribution. And then typically after those movies all kind of their after their run is concluded, there's usually a month, maybe 2 months, but it's usually about a month. And then you usually see, within that month span, you'll hear an announcement as to, when that movie is going to go to DVD or Blu-ray. And then, so then Opera House Video, or, Opera House Video is the only store that I'm aware of in Maine that actually you can go in and rent movies. So, but typically in the past, the stores would be notified, and then they would acquire a copy or a few copies of that new release, and then put it out that Tuesday. But it usually would be about a month, span or time. And back when, and this is not that long ago. This is like, I don't know, maybe right before the pandemic, so a little bit more than 3 years ago. Things started to change quite a bit once the pandemic hit, obviously, for many reasons, but that format really, really changed as far as the release date for things on DVD or availability in physical form. So, but typically that was the thing, and then that coming Tuesday, the films would come out, and I used to be in a habit of pretty much going every week to Opera House Video, and I would go on a Tuesday. I'd watch the movies that I own, and I have a pretty good sized collection of movies, and I'd watch what I would watch, but typically every Friday, or I got in a habit of every Saturday I would go to Opera House Video and rent a ton of movies. And a lot of the times I'd rent like newer releases, and there was always a lot of things coming out. But things are so different now with movies getting a runtime and like a theatrical release. A lot of movies don't really even get a theatrical release. A lot of movies are, sometimes exclusively only available on various streaming platforms. And then you have a lot of films that are released in the theater, but at the same time they're also available uh, for streaming. And then some films don't have any theatrical run, and and then there's a lag, and then you can get it streaming, and then at that point, maybe months later, you might have the chance to see it, a physical copy, a DVD version of it. But things have changed so much that so now, because of the streaming thing, if you're a person who wants to see a physical copy of it, it's an incredibly long wait. There's much more of a delay. Case in point, like I said in the beginning of the show, I've been doing a bunch of shows lately on very new releases. Well, they're old now, but they're new releases, at least for me. So, but now there's this huge lag as to when they actually come out. And like, one example is I did a show on Todd Field's Tar, which I had been wanting to see for a long time. Todd Field is just a tremendous director. I think one of the best guys around, one of the best directors around, a real powerhouse. And he's only got, a couple of movies, 3 movies to his credit. In the Bedroom with Sissy Spacek, just a tremendous movie, just a really great thriller, melodrama. Little Children, which is also a great thriller and melodrama and kind of a disturbing movie, really dark. All his films are pretty dark. And then Tar, which is an incredible movie that I just saw. But that movie actually came out in November of last year, and I know it was in the theaters for a couple of months. It made, it's definitely not a commercial film per se. It's more, it's a little bit more geared towards the art house crowd, if you will, but it's not it's not geared to the same audience that would go see Ant-Man, for instance. But that came out in November, and I just saw it last week. Like, it's crazy. And here we are in the spring of 2022. So, and that's all due to the delays because of streaming, because of streaming platforms. So now, and that's just one example. So typically that's what happens. So now, and and also another change I've been going through is I've been buying a lot more movies on my own. Financially, the last year or two have been, even though things financially are tough and trying for everyone, and food prices and everything, I I've last summer and this winter and whatnot, I was able to fortunate enough to have a little bit more work come my way, so I was able to get a little bit more money, cash flow coming in. So I've been buying movies more often. I used to do it. I used to buy movies. I'd go to my favorite place, Bull Moose. I would go there usually. In the past, I would go, every maybe 2 months or so. Now I go quite frequently. Much more. I go much more frequently now. I go, a few times a week. There was a few months fairly recently where I was going. I went like 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and I bought a batch of movies. And so, as far as my movie watching habits, that takes up a lot of my time, and I really enjoy that. So I've been buying more movies, but I also at the same time, a lot of these newer films, I don't. There's all of these, long delays as to when you can see them because again, and that's by choice. I don't I don't do any streaming, so I just have like, and I've talked about it a lot before in in other videos, but I have kind of a lot of issues around it. So I decided, that's the decision I've made, and I've kind of more or less stuck to it. So, but because of that, there's a long period of time until I see new releases. So now when I go to Opera House Video, I don't really rent any movies that I've seen before, where in the past I would. But now when I go there, I typically go there just to see new releases. And now it's like, she's sometimes once, 2 months might go by and I might go there once. I try to go there a little bit more often, but now it's like it's pretty infrequent. But I still go there. I still want to support that place. So it's definitely the climate. Well, just my personal climate, or my habits around how I watch films and what films I watch has changed dramatically. I've gotten way more into collecting, but you know that also, the big predicament of the delays is a huge factor. If that wasn't the case, I would probably rent movies more frequently, especially new releases. But it's an ever changing landscape, and it's all due, it's due to economics, it's due to lots of different factors. But I think it really comes down to just technology. I think it's just, it's the convenience of it, and it's all I attribute it all to streaming, even though I know there's other factors involved. But it's a very different thing. It's a very different thing. A lot of people I know, like every now and then, it will come up in conversation of, like, say, a movie to check out or recommend, and they'll the first thing that they'll do is they won't think of seeing if it's playing locally. They'll go home and watch it. Um, they'll stream it. That's like your typical response that I find as far as like if you're with somebody or whatever and it comes up, oh, you should check out this movie or blah blah blah. That's now what people naturally do, and you can't really change. You can't ignore technology or say it's bad per se. It's like it's there because well, the people want that, and you know, and I think people in the industry in the arts have to figure out a way how to navigate through that. I see that with music. You know, I have released lots of music online and I, playing bands and stuff, and I see how people's habits have changed drastically. I noticed it a few years before the pandemic where people, just say for instance around playing gigs or going to see live music. You know, from my perspective of when, from the perspective of playing gigs, typically gigs would start late. They would start at 9 o'clock. And you would get home. You would get home at like 1:30 or 2 on average. And that most of the time that would be even like locally. And if you were traveling, say to Portland or something, it would start even later, and you'd get home at when the sun's coming up. And then, and I don't, maybe it hasn't changed so much, but like for a while I was playing out of state, and way back when I was for a pretty good chunk of time I was playing in New York City, and it's even more of a time shift there. Things start. I remember playing gigs at like there were a couple times I remember we would go on at 11 o'clock, or I remember one time we played at like we didn't go on till 1 o'clock in the morning, and you'd be up all night. So that's probably hasn't changed so much in cities, but maybe it has. But it's been a while since I've been in that kind of situation. But things started to shift where people were wanting to be home by 9 o'clock. So I noticed before the pandemic where gigs were starting really early, like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock even, and the whole event would be done by 7, and sometimes earlier. And so you'd be done with a gig at like 6:37 on a Friday night, which in some ways is cool because then you have the night free to do whatever, and you're not getting home at like at a super late time. But you're also like, well, it's Friday, Saturday night. You want to like do stuff, and you want to that's typically when people want to go out and party, but things are wrapped up by 7, so it's always weird. And you know but at the same time, I noticed that there was a significant pay increase for bands. So it has its pluses, obviously, that being probably the most important. And, and I attribute that all to people's changing habits. And I feel like with the pandemic, it ushered in those things even more. And now, which was really funny, or just kind of a weird full circle, or it's kind of ironic, but I noticed I was fortunate enough this winter was actually really busy. Um, Gigs were starting to start. The start time for a lot of shows was on the later side, so 8 o'clock. So, and I've been going to see lots of live music, and that's still been on the earlier side, but I noticed certain things are starting later. So it's always kind of changing and shifting, but so it's just how things are. But anyway, I'm really excited about this show. This is another gem from my favorite label that puts out exploitation movies, and that is Mondo Macabra. I've done quite a few shows on on a bunch of different movies that were put out by Mondo Macabre. They are my favorite label. I was going through some of my collection the other day, and I realized, wow, I have quite a few of their titles, and they're just amazing. They take the deepest dive in the world of exploitation. The diversity that they have to their catalog is the best around. They specialize in these really, really obscure movies. I've been getting the last couple of releases I got were these Japanese movies that came out in the 60s. Totally bizarro and just amazing and just totally obscure. And, like I said, one of the coolest things about Mondo Macabre, I haven't seen, now that I think of it too, I haven't, none of the titles that I have are like American movies. They're all like foreign movies. I've always been a huge fan of foreign movies. I've never, people have hang-ups about reading subtitles, which I've never, gotten. I've never understood that. I've always loved foreign films. But I've noticed with exploitation, when it comes, and then with Mono Macabre, how vast and how huge of a scene there is, or there was, in the world of exploitation in the foreign genre, foreign film genre. Like, it's huge. There's a huge ocean of films that I've been discovering, and that's all thanks to Mondo Macabre. And again, there's so much variety. You have your sex exploitation movies. You have tons of great giallo films. There's action movies. There's also like super bizarro cult movies. There's films that have that are full on like slasher films. There's also supernatural based horror films, monster movies, just the full gamut. And there's also films of where they're just the genres of those, or they're incredibly like really steeped in like surrealist or surrealism. So there's so much variety. That's one of the things I love about the genre, about their label, is, and that I find myself watching their titles more and more, is there's so many different genres that they have to their catalog that it fits my mood. If I'm in the mood for something kind of whimsical and kind of surreal, I'll find something. If I want to find something that's just like pure action, I can find it. If I want to find something that's just really sleazy and nasty, I can find that. Or if I want something that's like, for example, one of the newer releases I bought was this Japanese movie. And it's a like kind of a classic old school ghost story. If I'm in the mood for something like that, I can find that. So there's like so much variety, and it's just wonderful. And again, about 99% of these films that I've gotten from Mondo Macabre are all films I've never seen before. I've just totally taken a chance. They're just, the quality is impeccable. And the other thing is that their prices are really good. Like, they're cheap. I'm really surprised. And they all come, pretty much every film I've bought from the label has a ton of special features. And it's amazing because you're talking, most of these films are super super underground and super obscure, and that they take on these projects to release these movies, out of love and passion, and then to also, that a lot of people don't even know about, including myself, and then to put together a package that's really awesome, remaster all of these films, and then to put, some special features on some, in included, that are really good. There's always at least some really great interview with like the director or the actors or just something, and it's really great, like quality stuff. And this film is another one I just bought, and I never seen it before, never even heard about it before, and that is In the Folds of Flesh. And this is a Mondo Macabre release. This came out in 1971, and it was directed by Sergio Bergonzelli. And this is a an Italian exploitation movie from Mondo Macabro. And this movie is totally bizarre. It's totally strange. It's a really hard movie to describe. I just watched this I just watched this movie the other night for the first time, so and I'm looking forward to watching this again. Again, like I said before, I I have definitely been really loving the movies that Mondo Macabro comes out, and I lately I've been, out of the movies I've been buying, and again, 99% of them are all films I've never seen before, but I've been rewatching a lot of these films, and they're they're wonderful. And the other thing is, I noticed too that these films are, they're obviously super uber low budget, and they're really sleazy, and they're pretty strange, and they incorporate elements of multiple genres. There's giallo, like, well, like for instance, for this film, it's pretty surrealistic. It's got a real kind of trashy pop culture vibe. It's got elements of horror in it, a little bit of a slasher element to it, and it's also kind of whimsical, and it's also a little bit of a melodrama. And my first impression, now that I've only seen this once, but I've been thinking about this movie a lot, In the Folds of Flesh, and it came out in '71, which is just crazy. I kind of feel like this movie deals with like trauma. It's about trauma, and it's about these two women who basically are, thrust into the situation of where their lives are in danger, and one of the women in the scenario, and it happens right in the beginning of the movie, where one of them is about to get raped, and it's pretty brutal, but they turn the tides on the predator, and they basically, the way the film opens up is, you see these two women being attacked by this guy, and there's a struggle, and it's going back and forth for a while, and then one of the girls gets out this like giant blade, and they basically hold off the guy, and they hold him down, and they cut his head off. And it's like literally the first 5 minutes of this movie, and this is like the starting point, and you're just like, what the fuck? And 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 then and the other thing too about a lot of these films is that they're really complex. I notice this movie has a lot of different themes. It's really layered. It's the storyline is pretty complex. And that's one of the things I find myself being drawn back to as to why I watch a lot of these films, is that the narrative for a lot of these films is pretty complicated. So I notice I'm getting something a little bit different each time, and I think a lot of them are, they're terrific and amazing, but because they're layered, you're getting something different, and you have to, like, at least for me, I find myself having to watch it again to kind of understand, what's going on, and to understand the narrative, because it's not really formulaic in any way. There's no, it's not, the narrative is not straightforward. So the story basically is centered on these two women kind of recovering, but particularly this one woman who cuts this guy's head off, and it's her kind of going about trying to keep her life afloat after having this horrible thing happen to her. And she has these visions of this trauma kind of reoccurring in her life, and there's all these dream sequences where totes this line of where you're not sure if this is something that's happening in reality or not. And you see how this trauma kind of affects her whole like life after the event. But it's wild. Like it's and then there's like it's interesting too because well without giving a spoiler giving the film away, but like the way it opens and then the way the film ends, it's like I don't know, like a bookends kind of thing. It like it has this conclusion, and there's all these clues in the beginning as to what is going to happen throughout the story, and then by the time you get to the end of the film, it like comes like full circle, and it's really interesting. But again, it's a very complex story. It's hard to explain, but I think initially that this film is about these two women dealing with their trauma of being violated, and then also like thankfully being able to defend themselves and prevent you know this horrible situation from happening. But it's a beautifully shot movie. It's got a lot of depth to it. It's pretty sleazy. It's really super low budget. Great music, beautiful cinematography, and again, it has all of these other kinds of genres thrown in. I couldn't say that this movie is a horror movie per se. I couldn't really say it's a pure giallo film. I couldn't really say it's a sex exploitation. It's its own thing, but it has elements of all of those genres in it, and that's one of the things I think is really cool. I mean, my favorite genre in the world of exploitation is the slasher genre. Like you can give me a slasher film at any time of day or any time at night, and and I'll watch the hell out of it. I have like that's my favorite genre or subgenre in the exploitation world. Like I just love it. But and obviously a slasher film, they're easy to define. Like my favorite slasher film of all time, Bill Luswig's Maniac. That's my favorite slasher film of all time. It's funny that I just thought of that because I watched a show recently. I watched a recent YouTube guy that I occasionally watch, and he's pretty good. And the whole show was his top 10 slasher films of all time, and I was just like, I couldn't believe that he never even mentioned Maniac, and I'm just like, man, what's wrong with people? And again, it's just my opinion, but it was funny. He did cover some films that were great. One of the things that he talked about was My Bloody Valentine, which is one of my all-time favorite slasher films. I love that movie to death. And it's a pretty obscure movie. It's definitely like it's an exploitation movie, but it's pretty obscure. But he mentioned that, and I thought that was awesome. And it's like I don't want to be a total snob or come across as a prick, but you know, he mentioned a lot of films in his list that were great, and I love all those films for the most part. But you know, as far as like some of the films that he mentioned, like Scream or like which was directed by Wes Craven, one of the icons of horror. And Scream is a great movie. I think it's a really great movie in a lot of ways. I think, for instance, Scream was a real juggernaut of a film because, it's. I think that film and the other films, I haven't really seen all of the films in the franchises. One or two, I've seen them in passing, and I thought they're okay. I've never been like, I've never been blown away by any of the films. I do like the first Scream quite a bit, and one day I would like to see the entire franchise because there was a new one that just came out. But for the most part, people that I see on YouTube that talk about the Scream movies, they all have these, giant boners over that franchise, and they just everybody just is falling all over themselves on how great that franchise is, and I'm just like, I don't know. I think it's a little bit silly that that franchise gets as much acclaim as it gets. But that being said, I think what Wes Craven did with Scream, I think that film was really, it was obviously really innovative in a lot of ways. It kind of, broke the fourth wall. It was kind of a meta movie. It was very original. There was all these other references to other classic horror films in that movie. It was pretty innovative that way. But that movie also, to a degree, really made horror commercially viable again because before, there was a big lag. Like horror, I think now is bigger than ever in a lot of ways. But obviously in the 70s and 80s, especially the 80s, the horror world was like massive, especially the slasher franchise, but it was massive. Every other week there was a new horror movie or slasher film coming out, even in the 90s and the 2000 ish. But there was, in the 90s or 80s, or I should say 90s, there was a real big lag, and a lot of horror films were not making any money anymore. They were, it was getting to a point of where there were fewer releases coming out. And as far as like commercial, at the commercial level, horror films were suffering quite a bit, and the genre itself was not making enough money to really sustain itself. But when Scream came along, that movie was a mega blockbuster, and that movie I feel was a real pivotal movie, probably the main movie that kind of reignited horror. And ever since that movie came out, there's been this huge passion from the public to spend money on all things horror. And ever since then, horror has been a very huge genre. But that movie, I think, it was definitely, especially when it came out, it was something very new. It was fresh, and it was innovative. And it's generally a pretty scary movie, and it's funny. It has other elements to it also, very suspenseful. But it really reignited the public's interest in horror, and so that, just in that regard, I think it's a great movie. But you know, just in that regard, like, it deserves that acclaim and respect. Even if you're a person who doesn't love that movie. I mean, that was a game changer when that movie came out, and it came from one of the most iconic directors in horror. Wes Craven. My favorite Wes Craven film is The Last House on the Left. I love that movie to death. But he also did some amazing movies throughout his entire career. He's most well known for the Scream franchise, but aside from that, obviously the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, which is awesome too. But I thought it was funny this guy's list, like he was naming, Scream as being his all-time favorite, and then he was kind of talking about Nightmare on Elm Street and Child's Play, and those are all great movies. And I love those movies. I grew up watching them, but I just felt like there were certain films that he could have focused on a little bit more, that more or less came before those movies, and that really I feel changed horror to a degree even more. And I felt like maybe this guy isn't taking a deep of enough dive to really see where horror came from or the origins. Like it would have been awesome to have seen him mention Maniac or like the New York Ripper from Lucio Fulci. I mean, just anything from Lucio Fulci, but there was nothing named. And so, and there's all, the Two Box Murders. There's so many great slasher films, but he mostly focused on the commercial films that came out in the 80s. And I love those films, but it would have been cooler if he, like, I noticed that it seems to be, I don't know if there's from that guy's perspective. And again, he can name whatever he wants. I don't really care, but as a fan of horror, it's like I feel like he missed the mark, and I feel like he could have taken a deeper dive and traced it back a little bit further. He did say My Bloody Valentine. He did name that as one of his, but it was number 10. And I thought, okay, that's cool that he at least named that movie. But generally a lot of these YouTube guys, I feel like don't take that deep dive and don't really like take the time to like trace back the whole thing. But again, that's just me. But again, getting back to In the Folds of Flesh, this movie is just awesome. Mono Macabre is just amazing. Speaking of taking a deep dive, like they do this, they do that thing like no other. Like even their motto is the wild side of world cinema. I mean, they 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 are true exemplars of that, and just so awesome. So I'm looking forward to watching this again. I just love their films so much, and like I said, about 99% of their films that I've seen, maybe one or two, but most of them I've never seen before, and I'm just like, what? What is this? Like sometimes I'm just like I'm amazed that these movies get made, and that they even get this kind of treatment, like 4K Blu-ray, and like, it's awesome. So this is Jason Dean. So this concludes today's show. So I appreciate the support and the love. Keep the comments coming. If you like this page, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Peace.